Good morning. My name is Ryan Bast of the Motor Safety Association, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on an introduction to guarding. And you may have noticed your microphone is muted. And the best way for us to communicate throughout the webinar is for you to enter any of your questions in or comments through the question box. And at this time, if each of you on the call right now would just send me a hello, a bit of a message, and that way I know you can hear me and we're able to communicate through the question box, I would appreciate it very much. So as those initial responses are coming in, it's nice to get those hellos out from you folks this morning, and I'd really like to welcome you again to this webinar on this very important topic of guarding. As we begin, the webinar is designed to provide educational information. Our staff, we can come out on site by your invitation and to assist you and advise on any situations looking at your tools, machinery, and equipment where guarding may be required. So if that's something that you're ever looking for in Saskatchewan for our members, we can come on site and take a look and offer suggestions on where guarding opportunities lie. Also in the webinar, we'll be going through various types of industry examples within our service shops and businesses throughout our industry sector. We'll highlight different types of guarding examples, but you're still encouraged to do your research before purchasing any type of example shown in the slides. And what I also would love to mention in this disclaimer is by completing the webinar today, it does not mean that your facility meets the OHS requirements or regulations for guarding standards. Again, this is designed as education to give you some insight as to an introduction to guarding. And as we progress, part of the introduction will go through that definition of guarding, going through some introductory comments about scenarios and some WCB stats, as well as OHS legislation, where we have seen examples of the various regulations used within our industry. So I'll highlight those. And with that, we'll be able to look at some of the different types of hazards that are applicable to guarding and the different types of industry examples, as I mentioned. And within these examples, there's about 35 different ones. And as we progress and move along, I'll just ask you if you perhaps use this example to give some comments or feedback on that, or if you don't use it, or if there's things we have covered which you've not seen before, to let us know what your thoughts are on those industry examples, or if there's something we missed. I'd love to hear that as well, because our industries are very diverse, which we do cover through Motor Safety Association. And when we conclude, there will be some resource templates and information that will be shared with the attendees today. So let's kick it off by speaking about what is guarding as well as safeguards. And the definitions are slightly different. When I think about guarding, it's essentially the process. And guarding is the process or the device to protect against damage or harm. It could be the solution or combination of solutions to eliminate or reduce the risk of exposure to hazardous or moving parts. A little bit different than what a safeguard is. That's the actual physical device, whether it be the guard, shield, wire mesh, guardrail gate, barrier, safety net, handrail, any type of equipment to protect the safety of workers. So again, guarding is more so that process, where safeguard is that actual physical device. And not to mix this up with personal protective equipment, because guarding and safeguarding does not include PPE. So equipment that you wear, such as safety glasses or a hard hat or steel toe shoes, do not fit the definitions of a safeguard. So the items that you wear are personal protective equipment. So just to get that out there as we start so that we're on the same page with those definitions. And unfortunately, in our industry, 3 examples came to mind immediately that I've had some engagement or some discussions with our members on. And I know there's so many more, and each of us may have been touched by a situation that involves guarding or have had calls or situations where we've been exposed to different types of guarding hazards. And I remember this one, it happened at a small farm equipment dealership in a smaller community where a technician was testing a mower conditioner, and he was listening to the drive line just to check if there's any unusual sounds around the U-joints and support bearings, and got too close. And this was an unguarded shaft, and that person lost his arm between the elbow and the shoulder. And I got a call from that dealership a few hours after this had happened, quite concerned with what had happened at this business. And this had a real effect on that community, the dealership itself, first responders, to witness such a traumatic event at that business. That's one that sticks out with me when I think about guarding. Another one not as severe, technician was pressing a bearing and the bearing shot out of the press and nearly contacted the worker, but went through the window of a combine. So a situation where guarding was absent, but it could have been as severe if it hit the worker or people in that trajectory zone. And another situation, a worker was attempting to compress an automotive shock strut to change out the spring, and the spring slipped out of the shock strut assembly tool, hitting the worker in the head, causing very serious injuries. So again, these are some very traumatic situations that have happened. Each one of these examples, I will have pictures of different types of guarding that could be used in those types of tools or equipment or parts, drive lines to keep people safe. We have found as well that many incidents from guarding occur because someone removed a guard, perhaps doing some maintenance to the piece of equipment, and the guard is laying behind the tool or the equipment, or it's disappeared over time, and it was just never reinstalled. And in these situations, the severity of situations involving tools, machinery, and equipment is often high when it comes to the outcome of the injury. So people can have amputations or death or very serious outcomes as a result of unguarded equipment. And when we think about guarding, there is a relationship to lockout tag out. We cannot just solely rely on our guarding to be effective. You still need to practice lockout, tag out, that energy isolation and releasing of that stored energy when conducting that service and maintenance. For your information, we just rolled out a free Lockout Tag Out online course on our website, which I would recommend as well to people to take. When we think about these tools and equipment, I talked about the shock press and the shock strut assembly for compressing springs in an automotive business. These did not have guards on it. It is still the employer's responsibility to ensure that safe guarding is installed. And I found this interesting. I was looking through a tool catalog, and within that catalog, I seen an advertisement to purchase a shop press, and then below it, there was an add-on option to purchase a guard. So I was satisfied that you were able to at least purchase a guard, but disappointed. Why wouldn't a guard come as standard equipment on that press? And I think for a price point to keep the price down, they made it as an option, but this should not be an option. This should be factory equipment, because we're running into issues now that people are trying to retrofit their presses with guards. And when you are looking at guarding or adding guarding to equipment, the guarding has to be effective. You can see on this here picture, the person is reaching underneath the guard to adjust or maintain a piece of equipment. The guarding needs to meet standards. And one of those standards is the opening related to the hazard behind the guard itself. So when we look at the hole size of the guarding opposed to the distance of the hazard it's trying to cover. And this chart makes reference to what that hole sizing could be. And again, when the larger the hole size, the further the distance has to be to that hazard. So I will be sending you out this chart as well as the guarding standard for a reference that you can utilize when it comes to using the appropriate guarding in the workplace. And I went into our WCB statistics or data that we receive, and over a 4-year period, we've had over 2,700 claims that could be related to guarding. These were defined as contact with objects and equipment. Huge costs to our industry, over $5 million in that same 4-year period. This could cause or relate to employers paying more in surcharges, as well as an increase in possible premiums, the more usage that we have on these types of claims. As well as for our employees, the people who were hurt. There's over 166,000 days lost experienced in our industry. And we think about that from an opportunity of absenteeism, lost productivity, and as well as people just being away from meaningful work when they are hurt from contacts with objects and equipment. So that's some of the data. But I looked closer within our OHS regulations in Saskatchewan, and I went to the electronic PDF version. The word guard was used 48 times in our provincial regulations. And I took a copy of some of those more common regulations and have put them on the screen here. And while we're thinking about that, I'm going to actually launch a poll question. When you're looking at these regulations listed on the screen, has your business ever been wrote up from one of the mentioned guarding regulations? And I'll give you a little bit of time to answer that poll question, whether it be for guardrails, toe boards, openings and floors, operating controls. That's speaks to guarding, and the safeguards themselves. So when we look at those types of regulations, I'm going to show you here what your results were. And 63% of your businesses have been wrote up from the OHS division for a guarding type of contravention. 25% not sure. 25% have not, and 13% are not sure. So again, some good information to give some insight as we look at this. I did contact the Ministry of Labor Relations and Workplace Safety's OHS division just to get a bit of a snapshot within our industry up until the third quarter of 2020, back up from 2016, to look at some of those regulations and how they relate back to where our members received those contraventions. And some of these may stand out for you or not. I did ask the officer that generated this report in regards to Regulation 244, safeguards for robotic systems. And I was told that they had been using Regulation 137 as the one that they would cite in those robotic types of systems. So I just even ask you on the line here now through the question box if any of these numbers do stand out at you, or if you had any thoughts in relation to those. And while those do come in, I want to mention my appreciation for filling out that poll. And I think that gives some good insight that 67% of you have had an OHS contravention related to guarding. So good information to fall back on here as we progress through the webinar. I'll now talk a little bit about the hierarchy of safeguarding. And if you may have heard of the hierarchy of controls, this will be similar, but it's going to be a little bit different, and you'll see what I mean as we move through the webinar. The first step is always eliminating the hazard. So if there's a way that we can eliminate the need for human interaction in the process, perhaps we don't have to have a worker in that trajectory zone where they could be exposed to that hazard. Or we can eliminate that pinch point in the process so that the worker doesn't have the opportunity to be in that zone, or using the automation process if possible. So a lot of times we cannot eliminate the hazard, but this is where we want to start, is perhaps we can eliminate the hazard in that first step. If we cannot, perhaps we can look at engineering controls. And this is, I think, what I thought about, and maybe what you think about as well when it comes to guarding. Again, these are those physical devices, those barriers, shields, guardrails. On the picture, there's a two-hand type of control. And this is, I think, the physical type of engineered controls when we think about guards or safeguarding in place. So if we can't eliminate it, perhaps we can protect it by using these types of engineering controls. And this one was new. This one was new to me when I was researching guarding. These are those awareness controls. And I've only ever heard this in terms of guarding and referencing to guarding. And this helps create awareness because we can use lights, beacons, perhaps safe walkways or safe zones that people can walk in to stay away from that hazard. So we still, if we can eliminate it or engineer it out with barriers, but these awareness controls also do that. They create that form of awareness. Next, we have the administrative type of controls. This is what we would see on paper or process that are used in addition to the guards. This could be our training program, our inspection and maintenance, or using this type of information that we can utilize for our members, giving them that type of administrative type of access to training and processes of equipment and maintenance. And lastly, the personal protective equipment. This is the final step in the hierarchy process. And remember, PPE such as safety glasses, respirators, gloves, visors, and hearing protection are not guards. The hazard is still there. If we weren't successful in eliminating, engineering it, or using awareness or admin controls, the PPE will help complement that. So if we can still use the engineering, awareness, administrative, the PPE is that last line of defense and should never be used as your primary source of safety in the workplace. So that's just a quick rundown on the hierarchy. And before I move to the next section, I'll just address a question that came in if you were able to get a copy of this presentation. And yes, what we will have is But by the end of the week on YouTube, we'll have this posted onto our website as so people can watch it live through there. We normally don't send out the slide deck. We used to, but people have been relying more so on the videos. But if people are interested in a copy of the slides, just send me a note and we can definitely get that to you as well. So some of the hazard types that we will think about when it comes to guarding are listed on this slide. So these are the types of hazards that we need to think about when we use those physical types of guards or barriers or those engineering controls in the workplace. And when we look at that, these are the items that I will be highlighting with specific industry examples. So if you, again, think of perhaps different types of hazards, and this is something that we'll be speaking to and utilizing in the coming slides, going through each of these hazard types and providing those very specific industry type of examples within our members. So I'll talk a bit about those hazard types, and one of them being, to elaborate on them more, are snag points. So if we have a rotating object, a snag point can catch. We see a nut with exposed thread. If we get too close with loose clothing, loose threads, long hair, we can get caught in that snag point, whether it be the bolts, exposed threads in the nut, or key stock on the right picture, or a set screw. These can all be snagged, and it can snag us and pull us in where we can experience an injury. The next is the nip point. And the nip point occurs when a machine part moves towards each other, or when that part moves past a stationary object. So we have our belt turning, and then eventually it meets the sheave or the pulley, or the chains turning and eventually meets that sprocket. And at that point where it meets, that's that nip point where we can have contact. Some people may call that a pinch point, which is perfectly fine. We know this is a hazard, whether it be a snag point, a nip point, or the pinch point. This is very common. It's any point that's possible for a person or part of a person's body to be caught between the moving parts of a machine. And that's going to pinch, as we've seen on this here slide. This is that pinch point that we were talking about. So addressing, controlling these types of hazards, being aware of them in the workplace are so critical. We didn't go into explanation of hazard assessments. I just want to highlight these are the different types of hazards that can occur. And just to give you a little hint, when the webinar concludes, I've got some great sample checklists and templates for assessments for tools and machinery that will be going out for our attendees today. So now I'm going to talk about the different industry examples, and this will actually make up the remainder of our webinar. I've got 36 different slides of guarding hazards with specific industry examples used within our membership. And this is where I'm going to ask you to have some fun, participate in the question box. If you've used any of these examples, say that you like it or you don't like it, or give me some feedback on it. And if there's something we've missed, let us know as well, because there's opportunities to share that with our attendees today. So keep that in mind. Also, if you are obtaining any types of examples you see, ensure that guarding is engineered, approved, and not home built. That's an important thing to mention. And I've mentioned in the disclaimer, do your homework before purchasing any of these types of products to ensure that they will work for the machine or equipment that you're going to be putting it on. And just to keep that in mind, because I see Some of our members have done some excellent jobs of procuring some guarding because the equipment didn't originally come with the guarding. And again, this is an employer responsibility to ensure that our machines are guarded. Let's talk about presses. I use this in one of the scenarios that we started with. And this is a great example of a chain mail type of press guard or curtain. These are actually made right at a manufacturer in Swift Current. You can provide them with the size of your press opening, and they will build you a press guard to fit the size of your press. It kind of works like a shower rod and curtain. You can hang it onto your press by bolting it on. And this works well. They engineer tested it at a manufacturer in Swift Current, and they had some real positive results that came out of that. So this is a great type of tool guarding that was used on a shop press. I did see another one used. This is kind of like a foil wrap, and it encloses the area that you're pressing so nothing can fly out. The downside is this is hard to see out of because you've kind of covered the whole thing together. And if what you're pressing happens to slip, it's not an effective guard if it happens to slip out because it's all kind of attached together. The press curtain on the previous slide was the more common one that we have seen. This here chop saw, this has an aftermarket guard that's been added to it. This is a clear guard, which I like because it is clear. You can see right through it. But I'm not saying change out your existing guarding. The main thing is these chop saws need to have a guard similar to what you see on the slide that moves up and down as the saw is lowered. Sometimes those do disappear at businesses, and we're going to always catch that when we're looking at your shops and let you know that you need to have that chop saw guarded. You may not think about flashback arresters as a type of guard. These are commonly used on our oxygen acetylene units to stop the flame or reverse flow of gas back into the equipment or supply line to protect the user from equipment or damages or explosions. These need to be located between the regulator and the hose end. And they look like these little check valves as you see on your left. The caveat to this is I've seen sometimes flashback arresters built right into your regulator units with your gauges and those assemblies. If that's the case, it's going to be clearly labeled and you're going to know about that. Next is a drill press guard. This handy little unit, it clamps right onto your drill and it works like a face shield or a visor. It flips up and down so you can change the drill bit. It moves as you drill into the piece of equipment you're drilling. It's awesome. You can see through it. It's just a great guard, and I don't see as many of these out there as I'd like, but whenever I do, I always give the member a thumbs up because these are just fantastic. Looking at your bench pedestal grinders, there's three things that we look at, as does the Ministry of OHS when they're doing inspections. First one being your side shields. Sometimes people will change out your grinding wheel, but they will lack to put that side shield on. And that's with this left arrow here, having your side guard installed. Next are your visors. Sometimes those crack or disappear. They need to be in place, as well as your tool rest ledger plate guard. This needs to be set correctly, tight to the grinding wheel so that it can guard from protecting your hand or the item you're grinding from getting caught in the grinder. Similarly to a handheld grinder, when people change out the grinding wheels on this, sometimes they lack putting the guard back on. So again, we're always looking for these types of guards when we are doing our facility inspections. And as for yourself, keep these in mind as we go through these examples. Think about what's in your facility and are you in fact using the guards? You might not think about vibration as a hazard, and it's an ergonomic type of hazard. And there's a product called Zorbethane Wrap, which we were actively involved in a case study in which we've seen a 90% reduction in the hazardous exposure to vibration by utilizing a Zorbethane wrap. So this product is available from many safety suppliers. How you see it on the screen, that's how you spell it if you want to look into that one. Essentially, it's a product you peel the back of, you cut it to the size, it sticks to the handles of perhaps impact wrenches, power tools to reduce that vibration hazard. And it is a very effective guard in doing so. The next one is a PTO guard. I won't spend a lot of time on this. I'm sure you're very familiar with PTO guards. They account for a large number of serious entanglement injuries. The top picture is a plastic guard or shield. It covers the rotating shafts, as well as the bottom picture. You see where the arrows are. Those are your PTO doors or covers. They fold down to cover the spline shaft. Could be on your input, which could be from a tractor, or the implement side of a piece of equipment where your shaft goes. So there's just knowing about those, the cover itself, as well as those fold down doors, are good examples of guarding. Then we have welding curtains. These are movable. They can be set up and stored as needed where welding occurs. And these guards protect from welding flash and sparks. So again, this is a type of guard that is used in the workplace. And also for belt pulleys, chain guards, where we see that power transmission, we see the type of guarding that encloses that area. Can be a mesh cover, could be a clear cover, such as what we see in the middle picture, or a solid cover type of shield. And these cover those moving parts so that we can not be exposed to those types of hazards. Fortunately, I see a lot of these type of guards laying around at businesses that may have been removed and not reinstalled. I do like this middle guard. It's clear so people can see through it, because that's sometimes what I hear people saying, that, oh, I took it off because I needed to see it. Well, this here type of guard allows you to see it while still being an effective guard used. So good opportunities to be aware of when it comes to those power transmission types of hazards. If your business has a conveyor, whether it be something that you see in this picture or a different type of conveyor, you can come across an example of having bumper guards and side shields that basically protect the worker where these parts are turning so that they don't get caught in the conveyor itself. Generally, these always come with the applicable guarding, but again, they may disappear in regards to people conducting maintenance on those conveyors. This one came to our attention. One of our members in Yorkton, in their mezzanine level, they've used this type of device, because this is always an issue where people have openings where they could fall when they're accessing their mezzanine level. And this type of guard allows the worker to flip it up, and when they flip it up, it prevents the fall hazard. And when they flip it down, it also prevents the fall hazard, but it allows the forklift or device to remove and access those pallets or crates. So great example of guarding. And I just ask you in the question box, again, if you've maybe seen this one or had heard of it, or just looking for, again, your comments as we go along, to gather some thoughts on this type of guard or some of the others we have showcased. This one guards, so we're still talking about the mezzanine level. Guardrails with toe boards need to be in place. This we come across quite often when we're doing facility inspections, that people are missing it. They may not have come across it. And I've actually got into some conversations where I've upset some contractors of construction companies. We've been invited into new dealerships, and when they're building the dealership, the contractor is put the guarding up, but they didn't put toe boards on. So we'll say, hey, this does not meet the OHS regulations for toe boards. And so we have a conversation, and they eventually have to put it in. But this is one that gets missed somewhat when it comes to toe boards on the guardrails. And the toe board protects so that items don't fall through the bottom. This was one that OHS had commonly cited as well. Here's an example of a overhead door type of opener guard. Just prevents pieces of equipment from contacting the overhead type of door. So that's an example. And just to back up to the mezzanine that I spoke about with that flip guard, someone else mentioned they'd seen remote types of doors, openers, and buttons, which do work great as well. Another one I've seen used, which I hadn't mentioned, is just like a guardrail gate that pulls across, as well as used in those mezzanine areas. If your business has an open pit for changing oil in it, there's a few different examples. The first one is a grate cover that slides on a track. I won't explain it too much because I've got a video in my next slide that will cover it. The next one is netting that can be used. And I actually had a conversation with an OHS officer about a week ago on both of these exact examples, and he indicated that as long as the cover for the lube pit meets regulation 124. In regulation 124, you can look that up, but I can also send it to you, but it speaks to the area being securely covered to withstand 360 kilograms per square meter of force, as well as having the applicable signage. So it needs to meet those requirements. You just can't run across some snow fence and call it netting and be unsure of what it actually holds. And you can also use railing around your open pits, but it has to meet regulation 122. And that just speaks to the spacing of the horizontal cross members. So again, those are some different types of examples that can be used. And as I was mentioning that, I did put the video on. I left the sound off on purpose just to give you an example. This is that graded type of loop pit cover. It essentially slides over the loop pit, and workers can store it when it's in use, and it's quite easily slides on that type of tracking system. So again, a lot of different options out there that can be used. If your business uses robotics, your robotic system needs to be guarded, and just in keeping in mind the area of travel of that robotic arm, that the guarding has to be applicable. You can see on this one too, it's got that awareness control. It's got that little beacon light on it also. We don't see too many of these in our service and sales types of industries, but they are out there. And when we think about the elimination of hazards, robotics can definitely do that. Another example is the floor mat where in front of a workstation. This is a guard that is weight activated because the worker has to be standing on the mat for in order for that machine to work that the person is using, and it keeps the operator safe out of the trajectory zone. So it's a weight activated type of guard device that keeps workers out of harm's way, is its intent. Another example around racking is, for one, make sure your racking is secured to the floor. And when in the securing process to create guarding, there's a barrier you can put around your racking to prevent accidental contact. And if you've ever seen on YouTube, I didn't put the video in there, but there's videos of people who contacted their racking with a forklift, and these things go down like dominoes because they're all bolted together. So that's why these got to be secured properly to the floor. And with this guarding that you see, it allows for people to have that additional barrier to prevent that accidental vehicular contact. So these are good add-ons. I'm sure most of you have racking at your facility. Light guards, this is a very common one that we see businesses being rolled up in our industry for, especially in parts departments or storage areas where there's racking and people have items on the top shelf that are light, perhaps air filters or light types of parts. And if they grab those off of the top shelf, they could make contact with the light and have glass covered all over them. So this is something, again, contractors have had those conversations. They've done renovations at dealerships. They never put the light guards on. So this is one that is very commonly cited in our regulation where businesses don't have guards on their lights when there's that close storage of items to the light area. Another one, these next few examples are just around vehicular traffic. Having a guard around your natural gas meter, this prevents from that contact with the vehicular traffic. Damage which could occur from contacting a gas line is very severe. And even to think about winter, people are they're doing snow removal, they can get too close to the buildings. So these types of guards, very preventative measure in implementing and putting this in place. So that's something that I encourage you to ensure that you can put into place quite easily. Next type is traffic control guards. And for traffic control guards, these could be those awareness items that we think about, such as those beacons, signage to create awareness with speed limits, routes of travel with arrows, and we're guarding against contact with vehicular traffic. And I'll tell you, we've been very busy with this lately. Last week in our announcement to our members, we mentioned that a lot of our businesses, our membership, is getting rolled up for not having an adequate traffic control policy or plan in place. So we've been busy going out to members, helping them put a traffic control plan into place. And it's an example of guarding. So if you're looking for this type of service, feel free to reach out to us for some support on that. And again, those directional arrows are something that's covered in that plan, as well as the drop-down arm as part of the barriers that can be used. As are these types of vehicle bumper guards that prevent damage from vehicular traffic to your building site. So these, again, help for that property damage and ensuring that it's quite an easy guard to put into place. Truck box hoist guards, these are engineer approved that fit into underneath the truck to hold the hoist up. This is something that is critical. We've had a serious outcome as a result of this in the past in our membership, and it's just ensuring that we have the adequate tools, so we're not stuffing wood blocks in here or some stand we built ourselves. There is the right tool guard available that can be used to keep people safe. This is one of those high severity outcomes if we're not using the right equipment. I talked a bit earlier in my example about strut compressors, and the picture on the left of the strut compressor does not have a guard on it. And it never came with a guard, but it's still the employer's responsibility to ensure that their tooling that they use is guarded. And there's some examples of some aftermarket guards that can be used to keep people safe, as this was one that has caused serious injury in our sectors. And we always point these out when we go to our automotive type of repair businesses. Tire changing guards or cages are something that needs to be in place when people are airing up a tire. If a tire were to zipper, this type of guard will catch that tire and contain it. So this again protects people when they're airing up a tire on vehicles, heavy trucks. This type of guard is a lot more common. It's gained popularity, especially in recent months. Sneeze guards, as we see in parts departments or front desks or reception areas, have been put into place to protect workers from airborne types of viruses. So again, these, if you may not have had this last year at this time, but I'm sure you may have something like this now or other protocols to prevent these types of viruses. Noise guards or sound curtains are designed to isolate an area or sound and to keep it in an area of containment. And when we think about our dealerships and the businesses that we work with, pressure washers, sometimes we see there's a separate room where the pressure washer pump is located to isolate that air noise. Air compressors can also be contained in a certain area to isolate that noise. So I think we've really emphasized that noise control process in the past, and we don't see matting or temporary things like these walls set up, but we've seen more so of relocating those noise sources, and our members have been doing a real good job of that. Around in our parking lots, bulk tanks, fuel storage, having a barrier again to prevent contact with is something that we see a lot of at our businesses that are bulk fuel dispensers, or some of our members that do have these types of tanks on site for fueling up equipment. They utilize these types of barriers. When it comes to liquids, unfortunately, I don't see these enough. Some of our members have these, and this is a guard that guards against spill containment. You can set your barrels on top of it, and if there is any type of a leak, it's caught in this type of guarding. Unfortunately, I see mostly oil spills with some Zorbol or some sorbent materials around it. But I'm thinking these are going to gain a little bit more popularity. I know a lot of leading employers are focusing as well on environment and protecting our environment, as well as this type of control is helpful. As is this type of guard. If you're moving liquids, this is a flange type of guard that is just designed to catch those slow leaks. And you can see through it if you do have a leak or not. So that's a great example of that type of guard if you are moving those types of products. As well as auger guarding on pieces of equipment. In our industry, we work with companies that are working with grain distributions, and they're servicing types of augers and flighting, and just to ensure that the necessary guarding is in place to prevent being caught in auger flighting. Very hazardous and severe. Mud flaps, example of guarding. These are mandatory in Saskatchewan to have some sort of mud flap. These are designed or rock guards to protect windshields, paint chips, or flying rocks as we are moving down our roadways. So if we're pulling a trailer or an RV, good to have guards in place for sure. And on an RV, we have a propane type of guard that covers our propane tanks. So these are used in those guards. They slip over the propane tanks, and we work with our RV dealers closely. And this is something that you want to ensure your RV tanks are covered, again, to protect from that flying type of debris. Our last industry example is just around fans. And if you have rotating fans and shrouds in your workplace, ensure that the correct shroud cover is on your fan to protect against moving fan blades. Remembering what we talked about earlier, having the chart to know about the specific sizes of openings when it comes to guards on our fans is essential. We want to ensure that these are covered properly. So I'm going to ask you, just through the question box here, launch a little bit of a poll here. After seeing the many industry examples, were you surprised by the many types available in our industry? And as you answer that, I just also ask for your questions and comments. We went over 36 different examples fairly quickly, but did we miss anything? Is there something in your workplace that is a guarding potential hazard that there's no guarding in place of? So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer the poll on that, and to look at that as well for potential types of hazards. So while I wait for those responses to come in, I'll share the results of the poll. It was a 3/4 split that after seeing the many types of guards, 3/4 of you were surprised by the different types of examples available. So thanks for your engagement on that poll. So again, as mentioned, I'll leave you another minute or two to kind of enter some questions that you might have, or different thoughts around guarding examples that were missed that I can still verbalize to our attendees on. But as we're kind of winding down here, we're just about at the end of the hour. All the attendees are going to get some fantastic resources sent to them. We have a maintenance and repair guarding checklist, as well as a safe guarding checklist that allows you to do a qualitative check at your business to see if there's any opportunities where we can improve our guarding if we're missing guards, as well as a machine risk assessment survey that can be used. So that's a great tool. I received permission from WorkSafe BC. They developed a fantastic guarding reference manual that Safe Work Manitoba had used, and I was able to get permission to share that with you folks. So there's some fantastic contents about the standards for guards that were used. So that's going to be coming your way. It was just too much to go through all of that in an hour. So that's going to be coming your way that you can follow up on and enjoy in your inbox at your own pace through those resource tools. We also have a new process that once the webinar concludes, you'll get an email from me. And in there's going to be these resources I mentioned, as well as a link. And when you go into that link, it allows you to fill out a quick sign up process to complete a quiz to get your certificate. There's a 5-question, multiple choice, true, false type of quiz. So once you go through that, you'll be able to print your certificate. And that's something we're looking at implementing in all our webinars that are currently on our website. We've got just around 30 of those. So this is an opportunity that people will have to go back into past webinars, register, challenge a little quiz, get a certificate after viewing them. So great opportunities for education, training, atmospheres to build on some industry knowledge from past webinars. All attendees will receive a short survey that they can provide feedback on the webinar itself, and also suggest future topics. All topics from webinars come from our audience, so we are able to present this information based on their needs of what they want more information on. And as mentioned, past webinars will be on our website and people have access to watch those. And I did have a couple requests for PDF versions, which I will send out to the people who had requested that through the question box. I had not seen any other questions come in, so I'll conclude by thanking you and participating in today's webinar on the introduction to guarding. We had some fun looking at the different industry examples, talked about some of the serious scenarios that had happened, and some of those definitions around safeguarding and guards itself. So again, the attendees, watch your inbox. You'll be getting some of this information coming your way, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you once the webinar concludes. And if you think of a question, you are welcome to call us, email us, reach out to us on our website or through Twitter, and we'll be happy to answer any types of guarding. We can come on site to your location for our members and look for those types of guarding hazards and help you go through that and provide feedback. So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking the time in joining today's webinar on an introduction to guarding. Thank you.